The Holy Spirit, as we experience it, as you experience it, particularly at this point in your life, is God kind of directing what we should be doing with our lives. When I was in my third year of college, I had moved into the seminary at that point, and I didn't like, the seminary was not good for me. It was like a monastery back in those days. It's all changed now. But towards springtime, I was kind of in depression because I had all this stuff in class, but I didn't seem to find anything that I could really put into practice in any kind of way. I would kind of want to see that. We hadn't seen any girls for quite some time. It was like a monastery. And I decided I was going to quit. And so I kind of prayed about it, asking God to answer whether my decision was what He wanted. And we're going home for Easter vacation, and it was Holy Saturday night, and I was in this depression. So I was just kind of walking around by myself. And some of the guys who were a few years ahead of me said, "Hey, come on, walk with us." Yeah, walk with us. And they were talking about a project they were working for in the inner city of Milwaukee, in what was primarily the black neighborhood. This was prior to the 60s with all the changes that took place. But of course, the biggest moral issue in the history of the United States has been the question, first of all, of slavery, but then also our relationship with those who were black in this country. And obviously we fought a huge war over the issue of slavery. And so that's been our primary moral issue. Well, these guys were working in the inner city. They had an eccentric millionaire that was funding a day camp for inner city kids. And by the end of walking with them, I said, "Hey, I'm going to come and work with you guys this summer." I decided this was kind of God's sign to me, speaking to me, that He wanted me to get involved in something practical. And they said, "Sorry, but this is only for guys who were in postgraduate and that sort of thing." And I said, "No, I'm coming to work with you." I was a pretty determined guy. Went home and told my folks that I was going to work in the inner city. Quit my factory summertime job. Came back from the Easter vacation, and they said, "Hey, we talked about it." And they said, "Maybe it would be a good idea to have somebody younger ready to take over for us. And so, yeah, you can come." And so I spent 5 years working during summer times in the inner city. And I went to conventions on interracial justice and things like that, and became very involved in that sort of thing. But one of my favorite stories about this was we worked with kids, and when I started we handled 200 kids a day. When I took over the program, we started handling 400 kids a day. We would feed them lunch and take them out to parks, take them out to integrate neighborhoods, that sort of thing. And we could hire people to sort of assist us. And I hired a girl who was very good with kids, and I could make the decision as the overseer to do that. Well, she and I got to be very, very good friends. Was probably my all-time best girlfriend. Okay. Well, we decided at one point to go to a movie. And the movie was in, at that time, a totally white neighborhood. And this was a totally black girl, okay? And I was a totally white guy. And so we got to this would be like Elm Grove, Brookfield, that sort of thing nowadays, okay? And we come into the movie, and there's all kinds of teenagers in the lobby of the movie, whatever. Every one of them is white, okay? And so I'm walking in with this black girl. Now, she happened to be a very nice-looking black girl. And I can sense that all these people are looking at me, all these teenagers, okay? And I'm not very far removed from their age. There's probably several of them there, a lot of them, they may be college students, as I was. And I can just see all the eyes looking at us as we walk by. Now, this girl that I'm walking with, she's very animated and we're talking about something, but I sense this. And they have to make, at this point in their life, some kind of decision, okay? Just, you know, do we accept something like this? Do we don't accept something like this? And after we got past them, I looked back to see what their faces would look like. And they're all looking at, and all of a sudden, it was, I don't know what it was at that time, but it was a thumbs up, okay? They approved. This guy is a fairly nice looking guy, and he's walking in here with a very black girl, who's very nice looking. And what's wrong with that? Even though their parents would not let black people move into their neighborhoods at that point in time, okay? I wondered, you know, later on as all the kind of things happened in the 60s after that, and all the turmoil, whether that little incident where they, in a sense, made a decision of acceptance, whether that influenced how they dealt with those kind of issues. So anyway, I want to talk about moral issues, and it involves us making a decision on what we think is good and bad, right and wrong, and so on, okay? I'm not going to use a lot of principles, but there are, I think, 3 basic principles to Catholic moral thinking. The first is that every decision we make, everything that we do, the basic law is love. And so we're kind of like this in our spirit. We're open to those who are on the outside. And we can open ourselves up more to those who are on the outside, love them more, or we can close ourselves up to the other people on the outside and their needs. And if we look at ourselves, probably all day long, we're kind of going like this. Selfishness at sometimes is pulling us into ourselves. And then we kind of make a decision to be a little bit more friendly and decent to others. But we fluctuate like this. Sainthood means that we open that up completely, and it stays open. There is something in the Catholic moral tradition that we call mortal sin. We've kind of trivialized it. We talk about a lot of things being mortal sin. But mortal sin is basically when what we are, our personality, closes in on ourselves. And we're only interested in ourselves. And love dies. Okay? Now what kind of things are that in the real world? In the early church, they had 3 things on their list. That's all. Murder. You cut off love for somebody else. Completely. The second was adultery, meaning you rejected family, children, everything, and you went your own way. And the third head was about your relationship with God. In the Roman Empire, you left the church, your faith community. Those were the only things they had as mortal sins. The next principle in moral theology for Catholics, and this is very typical of us, we say there's some kind of moral order out there. There are things that are built into us that are right and wrong. I'll give you an example that you can relate to. St. Augustine said the worst thing that you can do in your life is to lie. He said, because our minds are made for truth. And when you lie, you deny what your nature is made for. Now, how do we know that lying is wrong? Well, you all tell lies at times. And something happens to you when you do that. So that we can pick it up on a lie detector test, right? Your body rejects the idea of lying because you're built for truth. Your body reacts to it. There is a science built around the idea that we can look at a person who's lying and tell that they're lying. There's a fellow in the parish here, he's retired now, and he worked in law enforcement. He was an investigator for the Justice Department, something like that. And when I have a marriage, his wife and he do marriage prep for me. When I have people who I'm not too sure are telling the whole truth, I send them to him, because he knows all the techniques for recognizing when people are lying, or when they're not at least telling the truth in its entirety. Because our body rejects that. It's one of the reasons I give to people, next week we'll have a presentation on marriage. It's one of the reasons I say it's wrong for couples, particularly say people in high school, and they're going to talk about this, having sex. Because what sex says in one sense is, I give myself completely to you. I reveal myself completely to you. And in high school, you're not really able to do that. And you're probably not revealing yourself completely to this person at all. And sexuality is an expression of what we are. And that would be a form of deceit, lying. Okay. In society, there are certain things that are just natural. Stealing is wrong because people have a right to the things that they have, and you simply can't go and take it from them. That's wrong. Now, it's a limited right because some people can't just hoard everything together and not take into consideration the needs of others. And so in our society, we tax people. And so we take some money from the well-to-do to give to those in need. We decide to do that. Lying would be wrong in society. You go to the Walgreens and you buy something that you believe is good for you, and if they put something else in the package and it harms you, it's obviously wrong. See? Okay. And so there is a certain moral order to things. And we're always trying to search what that is. And that may change at times in new situations. The last principle in Catholic moral teaching is Jesus doesn't deal with right and wrong. Jesus deals with best and wrong. Okay? Best and wrong. And so he's always looking at holiness. And so he'll tell you what the ideal is. For example, if someone hits you on the right cheek, turn and offer him the other cheek besides. Well, he's calling us to not retaliate to people when they do something to us. Because what happens in society, and all we have to do is look at the Middle East, And what happens in society, if everybody tries to get back at everybody else, we end up killing each other. Somebody has to say, okay, that's all right. We're going to be peaceful. All right? But you can't live by that principle in all circumstances. For example, the police force in West Bend can't say if someone hits you, turn the other cheek. They won't be able to enforce the law very well that way. Okay? And if some country attacks another country, you have to defend yourself. Okay? But Jesus always is calling us to something higher and better. Okay? And sometimes we make the things that he calls us to the absolute value, and it won't work. Okay? By the way, Catholics are very good at moral issues and judgments in law. Take a look at the Supreme Court. Of the 9 judges on the Supreme Court, 6 are Catholic. We are very good at law and making decisions. The other 3, as I understand, are Jewish, because they come out of the Mosaic Law and that sort of thing. There are no Protestants on the Supreme Court because they have an interesting approach to law. They say something is wrong because God says it's wrong. Well, what if he changes his mind and says something the next day it's different? Well, then that's how it is then. We say God says something's wrong because it is wrong. He's merely pointing out to us what is wrong and what is harmful. And that's what the point of law is. Okay. I want to take some examples. First of all, life and death issues. About 25 years ago, maybe 30, we began with medicine to invent all kinds of things that could keep people alive indefinitely. For example, we have now equipment that can breathe for you. And you can be fed with a tube, and where you don't have to eat. We put the food in you. And so if a person is in something like a coma, we can keep them alive. But how long do we have to do that? And in what cases do we have to do that? Now, the medical profession, their purpose states that what they are to do is try to keep people alive. That's what they are for. And so whatever it was 25, 30 years ago, we were facing a dilemma. Who were we going to keep alive? Everybody that was in a coma or anything? And so the Catholic Church, because we are looked at as, well, moral thinkers, we forced a conclusion. There was a girl by the name of Kathleen Quinlan. I think she was 23. She had overdosed on drugs and was in a coma. And the question was, for the family, she's young. How long do we keep her just leave her in this coma? At some point they came to the decision that she was probably never going to come out of this thing. And so we said, we're going to force the issue. The family will sue in court to have the equipment taken off of her. Okay? Now somebody has to make a decision. Is that morally right or wrong? What it forced was the medical profession had to render an opinion on whether she could ever recover from this condition that she's in, this coma. And if she did, would she be able to function reasonably as a human being? They came to a decision on, they came to a decision on how to make that decision. They talked about brain waves. And so when certain brain waves were not there anymore, the person was not able to think anymore. And so they called it a vegetative state, meaning you have about as much thinking ability as a banana, okay? And so they set the standard, okay? Then we took this to the court and said, this girl, by medical judgment, will never be able to think again. She is not able to recover. Therefore, she is already dead. Her body is alive, but she is dead. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, because that's what you do with difficult things. And they said, that's correct. You can discontinue the equipment on her. And so, this is now a common decision. You all will probably experience making that decision at some point in your life. Okay? I did for my father. He was in a coma, and the question was whether they're going to continue any kind of medical stuff on him. They said they could, but we sat down with the doctors and said, no, he's not going to recover. Save the money, save the time, discontinue everything. I remember saying to them, I know you don't like to tell me this, but how long should we expect that he will be alive, the body would remain alive? And since I was up front with them, they said 7 days. And it was exactly 7 days later that I got the phone call in the middle of the night that he had died. Okay? But we made the decision. And we made it because this has now been thought through when a person is alive and when they're not. There are some kind of comas where people are still able to recover from it. In those cases, they generally wait a year and then discontinue it. There was an interesting case. I can't remember the name, but it was probably about 12 years ago. It was at the time of an election. And it was, again, all Catholics involved. It was a woman who had had some kind of stroke, young. I don't think she even had any kids yet, married. And she went into this vegetative state. Because it wasn't clear at that point initially whether she could recover, they used the equipment on her. And her parents wanted to keep her alive, but she was married, and her husband had the power of authority over it. It got to be 7 years. He had met a new girlfriend. They wanted to get married. But he would have to divorce, even though this person was in a vegetative state, he would have had to divorce her in order to be able to get married to somebody else. And because it was an election year, I remember it because it got into politics, whether he should do this, whether the hospital could discontinue this stuff and all this. They even appealed to the Supreme Court. But the church and the bishop and all the moral theologians didn't say a word. And he made the decision, and she died a couple days later. Because we had thought it through. A connected kind of thing. We are a church that is for life. But does every form of life have to be preserved? That gets to be a question, particularly with people who have cancer, and whether they are going to go through all the therapies or not. Okay? And so the janitor here, one of the janitors here, his wife came down with this cancer. They recommended chemotherapy. Now the question was, how much longer would she live because of the chemotherapy? Well, they said a year or two, maybe, chemotherapy. And so she made the decision, I talked with her, she made the decision to discontinue the chemotherapy and just let the cancer take its course. And so she died probably 4 months later, okay? Was treated with medications to take away the pain, but she chose to let herself die. That's perfectly fine, okay? We have a principle that we've kind of developed from this. It's a handy little thing in medical issues. You have to use ordinary means to keep yourself alive. You do not have to use extraordinary means. So for example, if you have an appendicitis, you can't decide to just let yourself die, because the treatment for that is rather simple. The surgery, at one point in life, way back in the past, that was a really dangerous kind of surgery. Nowadays, they probably do 3 holes in you and you leave the hospital in a day or two, okay? I remember a number of years ago, we had a girl in 8th grade. She had the appendicitis surgery on Sunday night, and she made it to the dance for her graduation on Friday. Okay. You would need to do that to keep yourself alive. But extraordinary treatment, like the stuff for cancers and things like that, you're free to make a choice on whether to use that or not. Okay. In the past 30 years, we had 2 wars in Iraq. The first war came about because Saddam Hussein at that time, who was head of Iraq, attacked a neighboring country to grab up all their oil money and their oil fields. He was attacking them. And so the United States put together a collection of countries, I think it was like 30 different countries, that decided to go in there and create a war with Saddam Hussein and throw him out of this country, which we did with pretty much ease. Okay. 10 years later, the United States came up with the idea that Saddam Hussein had some kind of deadly weapons. Bubonic plague, stuff like this. Oh, we didn't have any proof. But we came up with this theory. And so we tried to put together a coalition to go and take over the country and throw him out of his country. And all the European nations, with the guidance of the Catholic Church, said you can't do that, okay? Because we, way back in history, had to figure out when it was moral to go to war and when it was not. The first Christians were illegal in the Roman Empire. And so they were all pacifists. They would not join the army. They said, Jesus said, we're not to retaliate against other people. We're not going to do this. But when the empire became Christian, then it becomes a new kind of idea. And so they have to rethink this. And so my friend St. Augustine comes up with what is called, and those of you who have taken world history, I'm sure you've had this. He came up with something called a just war theory. Now he says with this, Jesus says, you can't retaliate to other people. You have to turn the other cheek. He said, however, Jesus also says you must love your neighbor and do the best for them. Now what happens if you're in a country and somebody else is attacking your country and they're going to be attacking your neighbors? You have to defend them. Okay? And so what are the conditions where that would be okay? Well, he says if somebody is attacking you, it is okay. But you're not free to go and attack somebody else. And if you attack somebody else to protect yourself, you have to make it between armies. Don't involve civilians in it. This has now become very complicated. Because once we invented something like an atomic bomb, and you drop this, you're dropping this on a city, and you're killing all kinds of people. And so that is an interesting question that we deal with. President Truman, who decided to drop that atomic bomb, said his moral reasons for that was, if we had to go and finish the Second World War with Japan, we would have lost 1 million people doing that. And they would have lost several million. And so he said it was better to destroy this small group of people, 60,000, 100,000, and bring the country to realize that they're in bad shape, rather than having more people killed. But it's still a question. The interesting thing for Catholics is the only city in Japan that had a large Catholic population was Hiroshima. And when they went over to drop the bomb, they were supposed to drop it over an industrial area, but it was kind of foggy. And the only thing they could see to see where the city was the Catholic cathedral, the steeple coming up through the fog. And so they dropped the bomb right on the Catholic cathedral. Okay? And a good share of the people who were killed in the city were Catholic. The Catholic Church there has never recovered from that. Let's see, what's my next issue? Oh! Morality keeps changing. Because there's some basic principles. Murder is wrong and stuff like that. But our understanding of human nature and our understanding of what makes things right and wrong changes. And so we're always living through some of those things. The ones I did on death issues. The most interesting one for me has been the question of depression and suicide. When I became a priest, it was on the books that if somebody killed themselves, people did not have a right to do that. You didn't own your life. It was given to you by God, and you had no right to end it. Something from the outside had to do that. You had no right to end your life. And so the rule was, and it was a very old rule, it had been around a long time, that if somebody committed suicide, they couldn't have a Catholic funeral because they were a murderer. Now that sounds very strange to us now. As a matter of fact, it sounded very strange to us 50 years ago when I became a priest, and none of us observed it. What happened in society at that time was that if somebody committed suicide, they never put it in the paper. Even young people, they simply said, died suddenly. That's all they said. Died suddenly. Okay? And we could guess, we did not know, and it was kind of the general conspiracy that not giving a person a funeral just was way out of line. We were beginning to know at that time that there was something that was called depression. We didn't know much about it. but we knew that it existed in some kind of way. A lot of people thought that you brought depression on yourself by thinking badly about things. Then, and I remember the moment, it was a program on public television, and it was a woman sitting there who had tried to commit suicide. She doused herself in gasoline and lit the match. However, she was in her car, and there wasn't enough oxygen in the car to ignite all this gasoline. And so some passerby saw this because it was burning somewhat there, and he opened the door and smothered the flames. Well, the program had this woman sitting there with her family telling the story about this and what she was thinking at the time, which was not much of anything. But what had happened right at that time is that medicine had discovered that there was a particular form of depression that was caused by a chemical deficiency in people's bodies. The chemistry was lithium. And if you gave people some lithium in some form, you could cure them of this depression. Now, they used to make a beer in West Bend called West Bend Lithium. I said that's why people are always cheerful in West Bend and you don't have suicides. Everybody's got enough lithium in them to, okay. But we knew at that point that some depressions had nothing to do with what you thought. It was all about body chemistry and things like that. And so at that point, we began to talk really seriously about depression. And you began to have programs in high school, which you have at all the high schools here, to help people deal with depressions. If somebody ever commits suicide, everybody's brought in for some kind of therapy treatments, okay? And we don't consider suicide either a crime or a sin. Now, it can be. I remember reading a story about a guy who had attempted suicide, and they asked him, why did you not go through with it? And he said, I grew up Catholic, and it said in my CCD class that you didn't have a right to kill yourself. Well, he was still in control of himself, see? Okay. But 3 years ago, we had two who had killed themselves. And both bishops came, and we didn't look at this as something sinful. They had had diseases that they had been struggling with for years. And they lost control, finally. Okay? How am I doing for time? Okay, I think it's time to, well, first of all, I'm going to ask this with some trepidation. Any questions on any of this? Okay. Next week, the class is going to be on marriage. And we'll look at some of the marriage issues and rights and wrongs and that. But for now, I'm going to have you divide up into those small groups and turn that